Hello, my name is Catherine Lok. I'm an architect practicing in Singapore. A few months ago, Graphisoft contacted me and asked me if I would speak at today's event, Building Together, and told me that the theme is digitalization and technology, or something like that. I can't quite remember. But for me, if I went into a very technical talk, I think it might be a little bit dry for you. And bearing in mind that maybe some of you are not yet users of BIM, I thought I would take it from a more personal level, from a personal perspective. So I decided I would talk about the Tao of BIM. And fortunately, Graphisoft didn't think that was too weird. And why Tao? Such a strange thing to use an ancient Chinese philosophy to talk about BIM. Well, Taoist philosophy has always fascinated me because I've always observed that life is full of paradoxes. Sometimes opposite things actually are the same. And sometimes when you try too hard to achieve something, you actually achieve its opposite. So what have I discovered while using BIM? Well, that's what I'm going to talk about today. So the Tao of BIM. Initially, when I started using BIM, I used to tell people, BIM is just a tool. If you're an architect, you still do what you do as an architect. So BIM is just a tool. But over the years, as I discovered the tool more and more and more, I actually realized that there's more to it than actually meets the eye. BIM is not just a tool. So I will show you a little bit about our journey over the years and how we use BIM and what it has made us become, not only from a professional perspective, but also at a personal level. Just to start, what actually does an architect do? Why do we want to even use BIM in the first place? So what's an architect? Well, we are a very, very ancient profession. And in fact, in Greek times, Plato wrote about it and said that architects actually can't just conceive of an idea, can't just pass judgment on other people's work, or can't just give instruction and walk away. The architect actually has to give proper orders and communicate the ideas clearly to make sure that everyone involved can finish their appointed task. And even during the Roman times, Vitruvius also wrote about architecture and talked about buildings having to have firmness, commodity, and delight. But he goes on to also say that we can't just talk about our design or even talk about how functional or how good the design is, but we must also be able to carry it into execution. We have to make our ideas into reality. We cannot just stop at the conceptual level. So since we're talking about BIM being a tool or not a tool, what tools do we actually use? Well, years and years ago, up to the 1980s, when I went to university, we were using manual drafting. So I had a drafting board that I had to bend over, gave me back ache, neck ache, shoulder pain, and whatever else you can think of. And I'm really, really glad that we have gone beyond that. And in fact, what you see here is a T-square and set square, but in those days, the technology was, we also had paralines, these sort of rulers that we could slide up and down. And there were also drafting machines, but essentially, we were still drawing things manually. And then after I graduated, I started practice in the 1990s. From university, I bought a beautiful set of pens and then never used it because technology surpassed what I was learning at university. So I started out learning AutoCAD, and then towards the 2000s, we started using SketchUp. And at that time, we thought SketchUp was the ants pants. You know, we could do our perspectives so quickly and easily. So for about 5-6 years or so, we continued to use SketchUp. And then around 2005, we looked at Revit and also ArchiCAD. And I think we bought ArchiCAD probably in 2006 or thereabouts. And maybe for about 3 or 4 years, we struggled a little bit to try to use it. Because BIM being a tool which has some intelligence, it means that you do need to do some settings to it to make it behave intelligently. So it wasn't actually until 2011 that we really got down to fully documenting one project in BIM. At that time, we were still designing in SketchUp. But then we decided, okay, once the design is settled and we were not so stressed out trying to figure out the design, we would go into BIM. So that was the first project where we actually did all our authority submissions and our tender documentation and construction documentation using BIM. So at that point in time, it was true that BIM was just a tool, because all we were doing was to replace one tool, like AutoCAD replaced the pencil or the pen, BIM replaced our AutoCAD. So at that point in time, BIM was just a tool. So that was 2011. And 5 years later, fast forward 5 years later, with every project we explored new features and tried to improve our workflow. So by 2016, we had moved on to OpenBIM. What we realized was that, as Vitruvius said, and as Plato also said, we actually have to communicate our ideas to the people who had to execute their various tasks. So the most important thing to us actually is communication, not so much the tool that we use. So then we realized that actually, regardless of the tool that you use, the most important thing is to make sure everyone is working off the same source of information so that we can minimize the discrepancies, and also to realize that the industry doesn't move at the same time. Different people use different tools, and the most important thing is to get people to work together and to be able to work together with as little effort in coordination as possible. So by using BIM as a single source of information, we were able to do that. So we found that actually many people were still using AutoCAD. In fact, even today, many are still using AutoCAD. And there's nothing wrong with that, because if that's the tool that works for them, then that's fine. But by using ArchiCAD, we were able to export in a format that they could use. And we had people also still using SketchUp, so we could also export in SketchUp. And then for lay clients, PDF is always good. Everybody can open PDF, everyone can understand PDF. And of course, BIMX is really fun. You can install it in your iPad, in your mobile phone. So for our clients, it's really fun. And in fact, the builder had it in his phone as well. So when we walked around site, sometimes we didn't have to carry rolls and rolls of construction drawings anymore, because he had his BIMX model in his phone. And whenever there were any issues, we could actually refer to the BIMX model. And then we had structural engineers who were also using other types of BIM. So then they wanted the geometry, and we could export in IFC. And last but not least, we also use a lot of the scheduling functions to get quantities and for the various calculations that we have to do. So if you look at BIM, from then on, it really wasn't just a tool, because it actually changed the way that we worked, and it actually changed the way that we interacted with other people, and started to change the way that we think as well. Then, 2020, I thought I'd better mention this, because this is like the hottest topic around the world. And, it's the first time that, when you watch the news around the world, everyone's news is the same, coronavirus, and how it has really affected our lives. But then professionally, has it really affected us? Well, in some ways, no, but in other ways, yes. And I think also, yes, in a very good way. So last year, when we were all in lockdown, of course, everyone moved to working from home. We were actually already working from home. I've been working from home since 1998, so it wasn't a very big difference for me. But what was different for us, or interesting for us, was that because the construction industry is cyclic and also quite sensitive to things like not having sufficient labor. In Singapore, we had a severe shortage of labor to carry out construction work. So traditional types of consultancy work then became less available. But we found that actually, because of our use of BIM, we were actually approached by Ventura, who is a mass engineered timber specialist, to help them implement BIM, because they wanted to take the opportunity at that time to use BIM to really look at how they can coordinate their prefabrication, because they found that in the past they were doing their shop drawings in AutoCAD, so still using 2D drafting. And as you can see from the picture on the screen, from the drawing, the connections, the timber connections are actually using steel plates and dowels and plugs. And the timber was being fabricated in Austria, while the steel plates were being fabricated in Singapore. And for some of their jobs, overseas jobs, sometimes the steel comes from India or any other country. So in this sort of globalized world, people can be fabricating things everywhere. And coordination then becomes really, really crucial, because if something arrives on site and it doesn't fit, then it becomes really, really expensive. So why did Ventura come to us? They worked with us on a previous project, but we were consultant architect at that time. But this time they came to us because they liked the way that we use BIM, and they wanted to kickstart their job much more quickly by engaging us to help them come up with their template, look at their workflows, and then help them to get on board really quickly. So it was quite a fun job for us, because we had never really gone into so much detail before. Normally our BIM model is actually quite detailed, and we thought that we modeled everything in great detail until we did this project where we were modeling at 0.5 mm tolerance. So once we got into that sort of literally nuts and bolts and dowels and plugs and plates and all of that, when we went back to our previous models, which we thought were very detailed, we suddenly realized that, oops, they didn't look quite so detailed now. So psychologically, something changed in us as well. And then we realized that there is actually no reason an architect shouldn't be involved further downstream. Normally, we stop at construction drawings. But now, what has changed for us is actually, we did find BIM very, very useful for us to control the process and to make sure people had the right information. But now, we also want to use BIM all the way to fabrication, so that we get involved right down to the minutest detail to make sure that the outcome is exactly what we want. So from this project, actually, we learned quite a lot, and it was really enjoyable for us. You can see from the shape of the building as well, we helped Ventura to model the hip junctions, because if you look at the timber pieces, the timber rafters that had to meet at the hip junction, they had to be cut at certain angles, not only straight up and down, but at different angles, different pitch. And then they all had to meet at one point with a plate that looked like a spider. Everything had to fit, and when they assemble it on site, it's all got to fit, and there cannot be any mistakes. Otherwise, it's going to cost them a lot of money and also cost them a lot of time. So this then again tells us that BIM actually is not a tool, because once you start using it, it becomes, in a way of life for us. We tend to use BIM for everything now, from the smallest to the biggest project. And in this case, even if you look at these junctions, we are modeling things that are very small, but we also model things which are very large. So in a way, it's across the board now we are using the tool. And this project, another interesting thing about this project, if you notice, is that there was a QR code in the drawing in the previous slide, and there is a QR code on the component itself. So what Ventura did was actually use this function that's available in BIMX. So they tag their drawings with the QR code so that their manufacturers can then put this QR code on the components, and then when they're delivered to site, the person on site can use BIMX on their tablet to scan the QR code, and then it will show the person on site which particular member this belongs to. So in that way, they again don't need to carry around rolls and rolls and rolls of drawings. Just by using the BIM X, they can identify where all the parts need to go. So again, this helps to minimize mistakes. It also helps them to track what's been delivered to site and what has not yet been delivered to site. And if something is defective, they can trace that particular piece and also inform the suppliers. So this was quite an interesting job for us. And according to Graphisoft, this is the first in Singapore using this QR code. So I think Ventura is quite proud of it, and they were very happy to provide me with the images to use for today's talk. So how has it changed practice? Apart from changing the way we document, does it really have any impact on how we practice? We have discovered that it didn't change very much for us because we were structured quite differently already. But if you look at the traditional architectural practice, if you remember my earlier slide about how we used to do manual drafting, manual drafting was a very, very laborious process. So the architect often had a team of technicians to help him or her. So it was quite often that practices were structured in this way, where you have designers who are either other architects or maybe architectural graduates who would be doing the design and preparing the sketches. And then there would be a technical manager, and under the technical manager, you would have a team of people who would be busy drawing up, drafting all the sketches into properly scaled drawings with proper line thicknesses, line weights, and the title blocks and all the technical things that needed to be done. And then this team would also be the ones to do the submission. And then there would also be another team of renderers, artists, who did artist impressions. In the past, they could be watercolors, pencil sketches, airbrush was one technology that came about. Then, of course, in the 1990s, when SketchUp became popular, designers started to use SketchUp, and technicians were using AutoCAD. And then we had rendering software like 3D Max from Autodesk come about as well. So you can see that it is a very fragmented practice and also a pyramidal structure, a hierarchical structure. And because there are so many people involved and each working off different platforms, the architect became a manager. So a lot of our time would be spent actually just managing people, coordinating and making sure people had the right information, checking other people's work as well. And then when BIM was initially introduced in Singapore, it was mandatory from 2013 for projects of gross floor area more than 20,000 square meters to be submitted to the authorities in BIM. And from 2015 onwards, projects of GFA more than 5,000 meters squared. So you can see that these are actually large projects. And it's like telling people to learn to drive, and on the first day that they learn to drive, you give them a Ferrari and tell them to drive at 200 km an hour. So of course, it was natural then for people to try to find a quick solution. So a lot of practices then created this BIM department, where there were people who could use BIM while everybody else couldn't, and then they would prepare the submission to authorities. So you can see that then if your practice is still this structure, BIM doesn't actually help you. It will actually create more confusion and give you more stress, and you will have more and more discrepancies. So actually BIM makes you more of what you are. If you're very organized, then everything becomes more organized. If you are disorganized, it becomes a million times more disorganized. If you have a lot of people, then if you structure yourself in the old way, you will actually create more and more confusion and more mistakes. So for some people, it's been a very hard journey switching to BIM. But what I would say is that you need to have the right structure to really benefit from a different workflow that works well with BIM. So what's our structure? Well, our structure is a non-hierarchical one. So what we try to do is have people of equal, or maybe not equal, but people who are highly skilled working together on the same platform in a non-hierarchical way. That means all of us are actually skilled in our own way, and there's no sort of overall boss telling everyone what to do. And we can use teamwork or BIM Cloud to actually interact and make sure that we are still all on the same page. And as I mentioned, coronavirus had a large impact on how we work in terms of people moving to working from home. For us, of course, not so much of an impact because we were already doing that. But what we found is that everyone else was also starting to do that. So it makes it a lot easier for us now when we want to collaborate with people because everyone is working from home. And we have so many technological tools and platforms and internet to actually facilitate remote working. So that's actually what's happening now. For some people, it's the present, and maybe for some people, it's the future. So you can see, really, BIM is not just a tool. If you look at the process of getting a building built, traditionally the architect is just involved in the conceptual design part, then detailed design. Previously we couldn't really do analysis, there was no software. We were also involved in documentation. And then we stopped there, we passed it on to the builder. But as I showed you just now, the architect actually can and should be involved in fabrication as well, and as well as construction sequencing. Because this is we need to take a holistic approach, especially when we look at things like sustainability. What is our impact on the planet? If we don't understand the whole process of getting a building built, as well as how the building is going to be built, how the building will function in use, then how do we make sure that our solutions are actually healthy and sustainable? So I see the architect's role actually expanding beyond documentation to fabrication, construction, sequencing, and even to facilities management as well. So really, it really changes the way we think and approach things towards a much more holistic approach. So going back to what was said in Plato's time, the architect really can connect with the role of, or reconnect with role as a master builder. And the irony, the Taoist part of it, is that we are now using the latest technology, something new, to actually achieve something that is very, very old. So I find that paradox actually quite inspiring. All throughout my practice, myself and my partner, we have always believed in making sure that we were involved in the process from beginning to end. So for us now, actually, the end it no longer stops at construction. We are looking at expanding our role into even further beyond that. So I've shown you what we've done over the past 20 plus years or so, or maybe 20 to 30 years. So how big is our practice? Well, actually, it's just the two of us. My partner, Ian Lander, and myself. We do everything ourselves. And in fact, we have been working like this even when we were using AutoCAD and SketchUp. So initially, there were a lot of constraints. In the 1990s and the early 2000s, we couldn't really collaborate with people as effectively. There was no internet, or internet was just beginning and the speed was very slow. We were still using fax machines. And then slowly, when there were emails, we couldn't email large files. And then, floppy disks would only take 1.4 megabyte of data. But in spite of that, actually, we used whatever tools were available to us at that time. And we could still do our work because of our mindset of what it meant to us to be architects. So as you can see, in a way, BIM is just a tool because it is your mindset as an architect that really determines how you work. So it doesn't matter what the tool is. But at the same time, BIM is also not just a tool to us. For us, it's like having superpowers because we are able to do so much more than we were able to before. And now we are able to also collaborate with other people who have superpowers as well. So it has really opened up so much, not only in terms of opportunity, in terms of business, but even socially. We have made a lot of new friends. We've met a lot of people through Graphisoft user group meetings. Socially, it's also made a difference to our lives. So in this sense, BIM is actually not just a tool. And I find this quote actually very apt from Buckminster Fuller. He says, if you want to teach people a new way of thinking, don't bother trying to teach them. Instead, give them a tool, the use of which will lead to new ways of thinking. And we think that that is really true. We didn't set out to change the way we think, but when we started using BIM and as we explored it more and more, we found ourselves actually starting to think very differently. So to recap, BIM is just a tool, but BIM is not just a tool. And if you look at this graphic here, I actually modeled this using arkhi. When I was preparing my slides yesterday, I was thinking, I was Googling, Tao, I'm talking about Tao. So I was Googling some Tao symbols, maybe I can put a black and white symbol. Then I thought, no, it doesn't really make sense to me. I'm going to draw it in arkhi. So what I've done is actually use the slab tool and drawn this symbol. And then I've selected stainless steel for one side and walnut on the other side, because I wanted contrasting materials, a cold material and a warm material, a new material and an old material. And I also wanted it in 3 dimensions to show you that when you look at it in plan, it looks 2-dimensional. But then when you look at it from a different angle, it actually has a 3rd dimension. So in that way, actually, BIM has got many dimensions. It's really for you to explore and discover. And the reason that we are able to collaborate with other superheroes is because they are good at different things. Using the same tool, because the tool is so complex, but it has so much potential, and there's so many aspects of it that you can explore, you can really collaborate with people who are good at different aspects of the software, and through that, actually, you will have superpowers. So that is the meaning of the Tao of BIM, and I hope you have enjoyed this talk. Thank you.